In today's episode, we're going to be talking with Keith Smith to break down everything salary cap related, just like we have every offseason. Stay tuned for all of this in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code, my goodness, I couldn't get it out there. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Before we get started with today's episode, I want to let you guys know, I did tell you guys in the last episode that Monday would be the first episode of our prospect episodes. We're going to push that back to Tuesday because I want to get this episode out for you guys. So don't worry, it's coming Tuesday. Just stay tuned. But thank you, Keith, for joining the podcast, man. You've joined it the last 2 years to talk with us about everything salary cap related. You can find him over on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA, contributor over at Spotrac. If you want to ask anything salary cap related, Keith is your guy. Keith, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, this is what I do. This is my time of year. So I'm super excited to get into a bunch of off-season topics with you.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. So obviously the Pistons had absolutely a horrible season this past year, but they're heading into the offseason with a lot of cap space. But for those out there who may not know just how much cap space the Detroit Pistons have, Keith, could you explain what the Pistons salary cap situation is looking like heading into the offseason?
Yeah, I project them to have the most cap space in the league going into the offseason. I project them to have about $64 million in space. That's a little flexible. There could be a little bit of a wiggle room in there, maybe slightly higher, maybe slightly less if they decide to keep a free agent or two. But that's where we're at. And this is all post draft lottery, which is, I guess, if there's any silver lining to dropping to the 5th pick, they got a little bit more cap space. I don't know that that's anybody's jumping up and down and celebrating over that one, but hey, we'll try to keep it positive. So yeah, $64 million. Their guaranteed salaries on the books right now are pretty minimal. They don't have a lot, and most of it is tied up in guys that are still on their rookie scale deals outside of Isaiah Stewart, who is moving into the first year of his extension. Everybody else is rookie scale guys. Of their free agents, I other than Samani Fontecchio, I've got them basically letting everybody else go for now. Doesn't mean they won't be back, but just not keeping them on the books with their various cap holds and the like. And then I've also got them waiving Troy Brown Jr. From his non-guaranteed contract. That's the one that could kind of go either way. I think they'll have a better idea when they need to make that decision. But that's how we get to $64 million, the guaranteed salaries that are left, plus about $8.3 million for the number 5 pick. And that gets us up to that big number of $64 million.
All right, so for those people out there who are listening that may not understand what cap holds are, could you explain what cap holds are? I'm looking at Spotrac as we're recording this. Obviously, you got James Wiseman with a $30 million cap hold, Malachi Flynn with $11.6 million cap hold, Simone Fontecchio with $5 million, then you got Jared Rhoden, Todd Gibson, etc. Could you just explain to everyone what are cap holds and how you maneuver around that?
Sure. So what a cap hold is designed to do is, I think even casual fans know teams can re-sign their own players and go over the salary cap to do so. But in the case of the Pistons, what they don't want to do is say, hey, you've only got X amount of guaranteed salaries, and then go spend that $60 million in cap space, then re-sign James Wiseman and Malachi Flynn and all these other guys. Let's just say those guys were awesome all-star level guys. You could very easily create the superest of super teams ever if you went in that direction. So what they do is, how a cap hold works is, in order to sign a player over the salary cap or to pay them the maximum amount you can outside of using cap space, there's things called bird rights. So there's 3 types. There's non-bird rights. That's players coming off a 1-year deal with the team, a early bird rights, that's a 2-year deal with the team, or full bird rights, that's 3 or more years with the team. So in that case, so even like James Wiseman, even though he's traded, he still has full bird rights because you inherit them from the other team when a player is traded. So in this case, we'll just use James Wiseman as the example. If the Pistons said, man, we really need to make sure we keep his bird rights, that's a $30 million cap hold. What a cap hold is designed to do is roughly represent the maximum contract that a player could sign for coming off of their current contract. Now, Wiseman's not going to get $30 million a year. We all know that. But that is a carryover from his draft status. As a former high draft pick, that carries over there. So in order for the Pistons to create that much cap space, they go through a process which is called renouncing cap hold. So they will renounce free agent rights. So for a guy like James Wiseman, they will renounce him or simply re-sign him. Let's say they're going to re-sign him for $7 million a year. You might do that right away, get that done and go. So a player's cap hold sits on the books till you either renounce them, which means basically you wipe it off the books, or you sign the player or the player signs somewhere else in the NBA, to be clear. Because if they sign outside of the NBA, that doesn't count. The free agent hold still stays on the books.
Okay, for everyone listening, I want to make sure you guys know that in the last segment, we will be answering questions that you guys asked me to ask Keith about the Pistons salary cap situation. So if we haven't hit on something that you're expecting to hear, it's most likely that you're going to hear about it in the final segment. So just stay tuned. We got a long episode. So the next place I want to go with that is Simone Fontecchio. So he is a restricted free agent. What is the whole situation with Simone Fontecchio? Because it's likely that the Pistons, he voiced after the season that he wants to come back. The whole goal is going to be to secure a long-term contract with the Detroit Pistons. What's the most they can offer him? What would be the best way about handling that with a restricted free agent while maintaining that salary flexibility that you mentioned at the beginning?
Yeah, so what happened with Fontecchio, because he started enough games between the Pistons and the Jazz last season, he hit what's called starter criteria, which basically what that does is that gives a player an increased qualifying offer and cap hold. So in his case, his qualifying offer would have been fairly minimal. Would have been pretty small, like $3 million ish. Because he hit this starter criteria, what happens is that bumps his qualifying offer up to about 5.2 ish million. I think, if I remember that correctly, off the top of my head, I should probably just look. 5.2 million. So what happens with Fontecchio is, in order to keep a player's restricted free agent rights, which means you have the right to match any contract they sign with another team, you have to issue what's called a qualifying offer. That is a 1-year contract offer. In Fontecchio's case, $5.2 million offer. He could just sign that and play. We occasionally see players do that. It's fairly rare. It's maybe 1 or 2 each year that do that at the most. But what will really happen is the Pistons will issue that. They'll have $5.2 million on the books. When I say they have $64 million in cap space too, that accounts for that $5 million cap hold for Fontecchio. That's already accounted for in that figure because we all assume they're going to do this. Then what happens is $5.2 million. That's not, you've already got $64 million. If they need $5 million more to make 2 max signings, see you later, Simone Fontecchio, right? Like that's probably how that'll go down. But in reality, what they'll do is they'll kind of do all of their other work, signing players, trading for players, whatever it is. Then they'll have already agreed to a contract with Fontecchio, and then they'll re-sign him doing that. The only way they may go a slightly different direction is they only have early bird rights on him, so they are limited in what they can pay him this summer if they use the early bird rights. But it's not so limiting that they couldn't do it, because it's a contract that's up to about $17.4 million per season. So they're probably not going to get into that range. So what's more likely to happen is they'll wait, they'll do everything else, then they'll use his bird rights to get him. Let's say he's going to make 8 to 10 million, 12 million, whatever it is, and they'll use his early bird rights that way to pay him. They wanted to pay him, let's say, $20 to $25 million next season. Again, completely unrealistic, they'd have to use their cap space to do that. And that's not something they're going to do. So he'll sit on the books. It'll be funny. People probably panic a little bit. Why are they not announcing Fontecchio's resigning? I know, Woj tweeted that they're signing him. What happened? Why is this one? It's just an order of operations thing where you're going to use up all your cap space first. Then you're going to go out and take care of. He is the only free agent I'm projecting to stay on the books. So you'll take care of him last in the order of operations.
Okay, perfect. That's what I had a lot of people asking about that. I had a lot of listeners asking, is this an Austin Reeves kind of situation with Simone Fontecchio? Do you think it is? Is it similar to that or no?
It is in theory. The difference is the Pistons have cap space, so they could pay him more than the limited amount that a player is allowed to get through the early bird rights. The other option is what you could see is if a team wanted to sign him to an offer sheet, that offer sheet is limited by what's called the arenas provision. So that's one of those ones where the most famous examples everybody goes to were Jeremy Lin and Omer Asik, where their contracts, I know we're going back a ways here. We're almost a decade out now from those. But what happened in that situation was they were signed to contracts, what I like to call is medium range, then huge salary. And that's what can happen under the arenas provision. I don't know that a team would, because it would take another team with cap space to be able to make an offer like that. And I don't know that another team with cap space, whether that be Philadelphia or Orlando or somebody, is like, we got to make Simone Fontecchio our number one priority. Let's go out, tie up all our cap space in an offer sheet, force the Pistons to match, and that. I don't think that's going to happen. So that's the little bit of a difference. Where with Austin Reeves, there was all those rumors of, well, the Spurs might sign him to 4 years. The most common quoted one was 4 years, $100 million, which is a little bit of rounding in there. But that's the place where the situations are the same, but it's just enough different that the Pistons can operate differently with how they could retain him. Where the Lakers, they had no shot at being a cap space team, so they were going to have to then match an arenas offer sheet if he signed one somewhere else in Reeves' case, which he ultimately did not end up doing.
PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest, most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch their winnings roll in. Get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a whole new level during basketball's postseason. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey, and college basketball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. And my favorite thing about PrizePicks, let's say you have an NBA player in your entry and he gets hurt in the first half, doesn't return in the second half. With PrizePicks, that player is automatically rebooted. It's an absolute game changer. It's why I love PrizePicks so much. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with PrizePicks. All right, and lastly, before we get into the second apron stuff, which I'm really looking forward to talking with you about, Kay Cunningham obviously is up for a rookie max extension this offseason. What would those numbers look like, and when is the earliest the Pistons can sign him to that?
Yeah, midnight on July 1st. So that is, I think most people know now, free agency opens at 6 p.m. Eastern on the June 30th. But in order to do the rookie scale deals, you still have to wait till midnight. So that's one where you're going to have to stay up late probably on that night to wait to see if it drops right away. So what we're looking at for him is a first-year salary, starts about $35.25 million. So let's plug that in right here live while we're doing this. I should have been a little bit better prepared, but it's all right. We'll get there pretty quick. So his I don't want to say it this way. I was going to say his minimum max salary, the lowest max salary you can get, which is 25% of the cap, would start at $35.25 million, and that would be for 5 years, $204.5 million. So call it 5,205. That's the figure that would be quoted, and that is a projection right now because the salary cap is not yet settled for next season. Once that does, then we will have that number fully locked in. But until that point, we are at That's where we're at. They could also do the language in there, the designated player language, where if Cunningham makes All NBA next year in the final year of his rookie scale contract, or wins MVP or Defensive Player of the Year, let's keep it more realistic and say All NBA. They could give him a contract that starts at $42.3 million, and how that one ends up looking is it ends up being, like I said, $42.3 million in first year salary. That would be 5 years, $245.3 million in total. So you're looking somewhere between 5 years, 205, and 5 years, 245 as the contract for Cade Cunningham. And I do project that he will get a max extension, because I think while he hasn't quite knocked all the way through to all-star status, I think the Pistons can be hopeful that let's improve the team around him. He could probably get there. And at that point, the 25% max is generally what we see. Guys who are all-star level guys coming off their rookie scale contracts, that's generally what they get.
All right, so there you go. I know a lot of you guys were interested in the Cade Cunningham numbers and what exactly would look like. But what I'm super interested in getting into is this second apron stuff. Because this has been watching the Phoenix Suns get knocked out of the playoffs, I think really sparked a lot of this conversation. I feel like the second apron talk kind of, went away for a minute. Like people just kind of forgot about it for a second. But as soon as the Suns lost, it's been talked about nonstop. And in the Pistons community, at least at the beginning of the year, Troy Weaver, the Pistons' current GM, and I don't think he's going to be that once they sign their president of basketball operations. But at the beginning of the year, there was a lot of referencing to this second apron. This is going to open up some doors for the Pistons, and obviously it may open up some doors for other small market teams as well. But I've had a lot of listeners ask, what is the second apron? What's going on with the second apron? And I've tried to explain it from what I know, but obviously you know way more about this than I do. So can you just give a brief explanation, and we'll obviously dive into it some more, but what is the second apron? What's the purpose of it?
Yeah, so what they did in this, I'm going to keep calling it the new CBA, even though we're now fully into it. But what they did in the new CBA, the whole goal of it was the very publicized goal was let's limit teams like the Warriors and the Clippers and what the Nets were becoming from spending what was going to be in range of $500 million on salary plus tax penalties. We got to curb that. We got to bring that down. We got to rein those teams in. Excuse me. Then what we see happen ultimately is with the second apron, which is up here, right? Those are the teams that are way up here at the top. And for anybody not watching, I've got my hand up above my head. For the teams with the teams at the bottom end of the salary, what they force those teams to do is spend up to the floor before free agency really wraps up, before the season starts. So if you remember a few years back, the Spurs and the Pacers went into the season with like $40 million on their books, and they became like everybody's favorite third team into 3-team trades and trade machine, because it was like, well, we'll just dump the salary on them. What they forced is those teams have to spend money. And the whole idea is make teams spend their money to get up to at least the minimum to the floor and not sit under it going into the season. So the money gets spent in the off season, and you're not just everybody's sitting on money and then we're playing kind of a money laundering game by moving it around. We want that money injected into the system, going to free agents, getting more guys paid. So what happens there is you're taking the teams up here and the teams down here, and you're trying to push everybody closer together. It's never going to be like this, even flat, but you get it kind of pushed a little bit closer together. And that should, in an ideal world, introduce more parity. So now there's your basic part. The second apron, what they did was how they're going to rein those teams in. There are kind of 5 levels. There are under the cap. There's right at the salary cap. There is under the tax, or right at the tax. Then there is the first apron and then the second apron. Second apron teams are the most expensive teams. Everybody knows who they are. They're the Phoenix Suns, the Boston Celtics, the Milwaukee Bucks. The Golden State Warriors have been there. They're going to try to rectify that some this offseason. The Clippers are probably going to be there pending what happens with Paul George, James Harden, in those guys. So what they did was they put restrictions on those teams. So if we go back a couple years ago, the Warriors, super duper expensive. They go out, they sign Dante DiVincenzo, and everybody throws up their arms and like, how did they add Dante DiVincenzo for $5 million? What happened here? Well, you used to be able to do that. They used to be able to make trades. They could package money together and go make trades. That's kind of how they ended up landing ultimately with Andrew Wiggins on the roster, because they just kept moving money around. What's happened now with those second apron teams, they have no signing exceptions like the non-taxpayer, the taxpayer, the biannual. Those are all gone. You can't use those. If they want to make trades, they can only send out one player in a trade. So you can't take a $15 million player and a $5 million player and go get a $20 million player. They're not allowed to aggregate salaries together like that. In a trade, you can only take back as much or less than what you send out. So I think most people know there's always been a little bit of a buffer where if you send out like 20 million, you could bring back like 22, 23 million. That's gone. You can only bring back 20 million if you send out 20 million. You can split that up though. You could send out 20 million and bring back 15 and 5. You could bring back 2 players. There's also, they can't sign buyout players who made more than the non-taxpayer mid-level. So no more Kevin Love joins the Miami Heat kind of situation. That's not allowed. You can't buy a draft pick. So team like Phoenix, which is way over the second apron, has very few roster spot filled. They couldn't go to a team sitting on extra second rounders and say, hey, here's a couple $1 million. We're going to buy a second rounder from you. That's no longer allowed either. So what those teams can really do is those very restricted trades. They can sign players to minimum contracts. They can sign their own draft picks, and they can re-sign their own free agents. And that's pretty much it. So you're kind of, what you see is what you get, minus a handful of other restricted ways to fill out your roster. So that's where they're trying to put the squeeze on those teams. Nobody's saying, hey, Warriors, we know you drafted Curry and Thompson and Green. We're not saying you can't keep re-signing those guys, but if you do, you're not going to be able to do that. And then on top of that, go sign a DiVincenzo or somebody like that.
So what I find so interesting about all this is that my question is, and obviously my takeaway from everything you said when I heard about the second apron, I read up on it, is basically you can't do anything. Like once you hit that second apron, it's going to be hard for you to do almost anything. So I don't understand what the Suns are doing, but this isn't Locked On Suns. This is Locked On Pistons, so we'll leave that alone. But for me, it's basically like, okay, you can't do anything if you're above that second. I don't know how you can get better. But the interesting part to me is, and this is why I want to lead, and well, eventually you guys will see where I'm going when tying this to the Pistons, is the question I have is, how many of these teams, because everyone just assumes, Troy Weaver spoke about at the beginning of the year, I think he kind of assumes it. I think a lot of people kind of assume, well, yeah, you're going to want to get out that second apron. They're going to get out of it. How many teams do you think are just going to say, screw it? Like, is it possible for all the teams to just say, whatever, we don't care, we're just going to go in the second apron anyways? Like, is the penalties that severe to where you think teams are actually going to say, we have to get out from this, we need to trade Kevin Durant or Karl Anthony Towns to get out of it? Or do you think they're just going to say, you know what, it is what it is, screw it, we're going to pay the money?
It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every playoff shot count. Remember, a few years ago, I've told you guys this many, many times, when betting became legal in Michigan, I didn't know where to go. I was new to all of this, didn't know anything about it. So I tried out FanDuel, and I have not turned back since. I've loved it. It's super self-explanatory, super easy to use, and a lot of fun to use. Maybe a little bit too much fun for me. But visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make every playoff shot count and start the fun today. Visit FanDuel. Again, FanDuel's America's #1 sportsbook.
I'm glad you added Cat there, because Minnesota is definitely going to be a team that's going to be dealing with the second apron next year as extensions kick in for a bunch of their guys. So we're going to see, right? We don't know yet exactly where teams are at. The Warriors, for example, have been very open and upfront going into this summer of whether it be ownership and the front office of, we got to start getting out of these second apron issues, have less money committed, not because they're spending too much. They could continue to spend, but they are fully realizing we can't build a roster that we need. And Curry, Thompson, and Green are older. They're not enough. Just those three guys and the two of us, and that's probably a 500 team, right? Like they're not there anymore. I'm assuming you can play a little bit. I would be definitely everybody be hunting me and they try to figure it out. But we'll assume they could have done that at the peak of their powers. Now they're in a position where we got to fill the roster out, right? We have to get real talent around these guys. We got to be 7, 8, 9, 10 deep. So I think what they're looking at is Chris Paul, $30 million non-guaranteed. If there was no second apron, keep him. We'll just keep rolling. We'll keep rolling forward. With the second apron, I think you're going to see them waive Chris Paul and go into a different kind of place with that. Klay Thompson makes 40-something million this year. Probably only comes back for about half that, maybe a little bit more. And all that's going to be driven on, let's get under this second apron. Let's give our front office the ability to do other stuff. Let's give Mike Dunleavy and crew the ability to really go make trades, go make signings, do some other things that he wouldn't have otherwise. Now, if you go to the other end of the spectrum, you have a team like Boston. They're thinking, hey, unless things really go sideways, we should be competing for a title. We have a pretty deep roster. We can probably for 3-4 years in total really commit to being this super duper expensive team. Let's just go for it. I don't think they're in a spot where they're going to say, man, we got to trade Jaylen Brown because we gotta alleviate these apron concerns. We got to get under the apron to make other moves because their top 7, 8 guys are all pretty locked in for at least the next couple of seasons, if not beyond that. So they're in a spot that's a little bit different. Then you get to a team like the Suns. Though we already said it, the Suns have $194 million committed to 7 players. That's less than a half a roster. So and just so everybody knows, the second apron is $189 million. So by the time the Suns fill out their roster with 7 or 8 more signings or acquisitions through the draft, whatever they do, we're talking about a team that's going to be well over $200 million in just salary. Then you add the tax penalties on top of that. They're going to be approaching $500 million. But they're in a position where they are going to be in a spot where it will be extremely expensive for them. They are going to be there and then they won't be, to your point, you won't be able to really do anything. You're down to, all right, minimum roulette here. Let's play it again. We hit on a couple guys last year, but a bunch of those guys washed out and didn't really work out. And then what you're going to have to see the Suns do is they are going to, or the assumption has been, well, how do you get out of this? Well, they don't have like a $30 million player they can just waive like the Warriors do with Chris Paul. They don't have a free agent who, hey, let's bring him back for half of his contract. They're in a spot where kind of everybody's like, well, you're going to have to make a trade to get out of it. That could be where it's, hey, whether it's the Pistons or any one of the other cap space teams this summer, hey, we got to trade one of Durant, Booker, or I'll say Beal, but that's probably not realistic. And it's not going to be Booker because he's just starting a new extension. He's the youngest guy. So everybody kind of turned to, well, they might have to trade Kevin Durant. And then, of course, that all started with the, well, KD's never happy anywhere anyway. Maybe he wants to go somewhere. But James Jones came out and said this week, I'm not trading anybody. Like, we're keeping these 3 guys. We're going to figure this out and go. They just hired one of the best cap guys in the world to come in. I believe it's Mark Tellum. I should know that it's either Mark or Mike. I don't know why I'm getting tripped up on that right now. But they just hired him. Matt Tellum. It is to come in. He had worked for the Nets. He's a really sharp cap guy, very well respected. To come in, I think, to help. Hey, how can we work around this a little bit? But that's where the Suns are at. They're in a tough spot. But Minnesota, if they fall short, they're going to be very expensive. Denver's super expensive. Milwaukee fell way short. They're very, very expensive. So a lot of these teams that went into the second apron this first year of its existence, they're not really living up to what their teams paid for. And then that's put them in a very tough spot.
So to tie all of that in, we need to get all the information out there before we try to tie it into the Pistons so you guys understood everything. To tie it back into the Pistons, this is something I've talked about on the podcast a lot. It felt like, and I think it's played out, that Troy Weaver and the Pistons front office put all their eggs into the basket of there's going to be a team that needs to get off a contract. We're going to remain flexible with salary cap. So when that comes, our biggest trade asset, we don't have a lot of trade assets. We don't have a lot of picks. We don't have a lot of great young players, but what we do have is open salary cap. So it feels like they put all their eggs into that basket of when that time comes, we're going to be one of the only teams that can just take that contract on and free up everything for an opposing team. My question is there any players you think that the Pistons or Pistons fans should be watching for? And two, do you think that is a good strategy to have for a team like the Pistons? Because my opinion is what I look at it as, I think it makes sense, but you kind of need another team to say, we don't want to be in the second apron. If teams just decide they're going to stay there, you're kind of just like sitting on cap space now for no reason. So I guess the question I'm really asking is, are there any players out there you think that Pistons fans should be watching for in that scenario? And two, do you think that having open salary cap space is as valuable as what Troy Weaver has made it seem like it is? Do you think it is as valuable as that, or do you think maybe it's being a bit overvalued?
Yeah, it's funny. There's a saying that goes around the NBA of, all right, cap space sounds great, but cap space has never scored a point in the league, right? So it is very true. It's great to have it. It all depends on how you use it. And I know Pistons fans know probably better than most in recent years. Yeah, we haven't really used it all that great, at least we've kind of eaten some contracts, but we never ate the contracts to get back the 3 first-round picks or anything like that, right? It was always just eat a contract and we're going to get a second or a middling first or something like that. And I know that gets frustrating for folks. So I think where we're at with the Pistons and with these second apron teams, I think there are definitely second apron teams that could for sure look to get off some money this summer. So right now, I project there to be a minimum of 8 second apron teams going into the offseason. Now, they may not all be there right at the start of the offseason, but by the time they fill out their rosters, they make some moves, they'll be there. So that's Boston, Denver, the Clippers, the Lakers, the Grizzlies, the Bucks, the Timberwolves, and the Suns. And those are just presented alphabetically by city. Just in case anybody's like, why are they in that order? Like that's it. It's just alphabetically by city. Now, we already talked about Boston. I don't think they're going to be looking to get off any money. Phoenix has already said they're not going to do it. Now, at this time of year, I trust my extent of trust in NBA general managers goes about as far as I can pick them up and throw them down the driveway, which is not very far. So, but we'll take him at his word that he's not breaking up his big three. He's not looking to, get just straight salary dump guys. So we'll take them at their word with that. So that kind of leaves the Clippers are in a weird spot. They're trying to be really expensive because they're trying to re-sign Paul George and re-sign James Harden. So I don't think they're a team that's necessarily like got to get out of this second apron. Lakers are in a little bit of a weird place too because they're going to either re-sign or trade for some guys or make something happen to be in a spot where they're probably going to be pretty expensive too. So now we're kind of left with Denver, Memphis, Milwaukee, and Minnesota. Somebody out of Denver and Minnesota, I think, is going to come out feeling a little disappointed. Here, they're going to lose a game 7. They're not even going to go to the West Finals. And I think you may see one of those teams look at it and say, all right, we got to do something different. If it's the Nuggets, could the Nuggets look at it and say, you know what? Now's the time. We got to move Michael Porter Jr. Let's try to get a little less expensive. Let's free up some tools to try to flesh out our roster a little bit. Whether we trade him and bring in a couple guys or we trade him out just to get off some money, that could be a direction they go. Because I think they're going to want to re-sign Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. They're going to extend Jamal Murray. I think we can feel safe in that. They've already got Aaron Gordon. They've got Jokic. And then the rest of their guys are on rookie contracts that don't make that much money. So that kind of leads me to, could a Michael Porter Jr. be on the move? If you're Minnesota, are you looking at, all right, man, this really went sideways on us. We didn't get as far as we wanted to be. And we're about to be way more expensive than we've ever been in franchise history. And we've got this weird ownership thing going on. So maybe they'll look to rebalance a little bit. Could that come in the form of a Karl-Anthony Towns trade? Maybe. Maybe they do look at it and say, you know what, Gobert, Reed, that's good enough. We got McDaniels. Obviously, we have Anthony Edwards as the new face of our franchise. We go. I kind of don't think they'll do that this summer. I think they're going to have one more year at least to being pretty expensive. And then probably a year from now, they'll start making those decisions. But maybe they push into that. I think Milwaukee's in a weird spot where it is not only are they super expensive, but they're also very old. So it turns into, all right, well, we're not moving Dame, we're not moving Giannis, but could it be time to get off Chris Middleton? Is that a direction we want to go? Do we want to, move off him? Do we feel like we've got other guys who can step in and play, and he only plays 55, 60 games a year now anyway? Where are we at? Let's maybe go in a direction like that. So those are the things I think you're looking at with those second apron teams. And then if we go kind of down a level into the first apron, that's where you've got like the Warriors. They're going to be looking to get off some money. I think most of it will happen through waiving Chris Paul and probably ultimately re-signing Clay for like half what he makes. That should get him about there. But they could say, man, we got to get off Andrew Wiggins' contract. We're going to move him. The Miami Heat, maybe the Miami Heat say, all right, we haven't been able to package Tyler Hero together. Let's get out of that contract. Dallas, I think they're content being a little bit more expensive. I don't think they'll shed money. Then we get to two really interesting teams. The Atlanta Hawks are way too mid, to use a term my daughter uses, to be as expensive as they are. They need to get off salary. And not even mid, just straight up bad, are the Portland Trailblazers, who are sitting right around the luxury tax first apron line. That can't be a thing. You cannot be that bad and be there. So they're going to have guys like Malcolm Brogdon, Robert Williams, maybe Jeremy Grant, maybe DeAndre Ayton. They're going to have maybe Anthony Simons. You're going to have a whole bunch of guys outside of like Scoot Henderson, Shaden Sharp, the rookie scale guys. I think they're going to be very open for business to start moving some players and start really resetting their books, because you cannot be that expensive. It'd be bad. And they're on like Memphis was bad this year. But we all know Memphis was bad because the wheels came off. You had Josh suspension, you had a million injuries. It all fell apart on them. They kind of took a gap year. They'll be right back in contention in the West next year. At least we assume so. Portland's nowhere close. They've got years of building to do that. You can't be that expensive and be that bad. So they're going to have to make some moves going into the summer. So those are the places where a team like the Pistons, if you don't want to go spend it on a bunch of mid-tier free agents, if you want to do it through cap space, you could do it in a way this year where it's not just give me your Dwayne Dedmon contract, give me your other bad contracts. We'll eat them. We'll do it that way. You could do it in a place where it is, hey, give me 1, 2, maybe even 3 guys that can actually really play and could help us be a better team next year. I think they're well positioned to be able to do that.
All right, and before we move on to answering all the questions, just quick answer here. What do you think would be like in that scenario? Do you think there's like teams would be requesting legit value back, or will like the negotiation be that we're taking this salary off of you, we're not giving much in return, we're doing you a solid by taking this the contract off of you? So what do you think a potential trade would look like from a value wise from the Pistons? Are you talking about like a second round pick, a first round pick? Like what do you think that would look like?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be just we're just taking these guys, because none of those guys are like on terrible contracts where they're unplayable type players. If we were going to do something like that, that would be more along the lines of, all right, you're going to pay us in picks to eat Lonzo Ball's contract or to eat Ben Simmons's contract. Guys who we're not sure they're going to even be able to get on the floor next year, never mind do much of anything productive for you. Those guys are all those names that I rattled off, those are all guys that can either still play or are really good in some cases, and their teams are just in tricky spots. So I don't think the Pistons are going to get paid, and I don't think they're going to get a fully sweetheart deal. But I don't think it's going to have, like, if they wanted Karl Anthony Towns in just a vacuum normal market, they're probably having to give up a couple first round picks and probably one of the young players to do it. In this world, it might be, hey, we can offer you 2 picks, but we're not giving up one of our young kids to do that. So what do you think? Do you need off the contract that badly? That's the kind of place where I think they could make out okay, where it's not, we're doing all this. So I'll say on most of those guys, it's probably a pick or a player, or maybe both if the players are that good enough. It's just not in a position where I don't think it's going to be anything like, here's our draft moving forward. That I don't project there's going to be anybody on the market like that this summer that the Pistons are in play to go get. I don't think that kind of move would make sense for them or the player at this point.
All right, perfect. I think that segment, everyone's going to love that. This has been something they've been wanting to find out. A lot of people are trying to get the better understanding of. I think that was all great. So appreciate you for that, Keith. But we're going to wrap up the podcast. I'm going to ask you some questions that some Pistons fans, some listeners wanted to hear you answer, and then we'll wrap up the podcast here. So, and a lot of this may just be guesswork. I don't know if there's like concrete answers for this, but anyways, one of the questions is, is there a way that what is the most expected salaries for you think, for Malik Monk, Gary Trent Jr., and Tobias Harris?
Okay, so all kind of different places. I think Malik Monk is going to get somewhere between 20 and 25 million a year. I know sometimes when you start talking 100 million, that's still like this magical barrier for some people where it's like, that's a lot of money. I mean, it's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. I'll take it if anybody's going to drop it off. I'll hit me up. I'll send you my address and bank account info and we'll go. But I think in the NBA, 20 to 25 million is really, that's not that much. That is, far less than 25% of the salary cap. You're down in the range of that's like 15% of the salary cap now. So I think a guy like Monk is worth more than the mid-level. So that's going to push his number up. He's pretty plug and play, in my opinion. You can put him in just about any team, and he can fit because he can start, he can come off the bench, he can shoot, he can play make, he can do a lot of different things. So I've got him at about 20 to 25 million. The only caveat I'll put to that is, and I wrote about this on Spotrac when I wrote the Kings offseason preview, there is a process the Kings could do, which is they kind of pay Monk a little bit this year and next year, and then they make it up to him with his bird rights a couple years later. There is the possibility that could be the direction it goes. So that would be kind of a wink-wink kind of deal with him and the Kings, and that is certainly possible that it could go that way. Gary Trent Jr., I think he's more of a mid-level kind of guy, maybe a little bit more. I think the problem for him to get a little bit more, he has to have a team like Detroit, Philadelphia, or Orlando who really wants him. Otherwise, the most other teams can offer him is the mid-level. Sorry about that. I had to cough, and I didn't want to do it in everybody's ears.
No, you're good.
Then the next guy, Tobias Harris, that one's really hard because I now think we've gone way too far on the Tobias Harris stinks side of things. People are acting like he's barely an NBA player anymore, and I don't think that's where we're at. He's also certainly not anybody who's going to touch anywhere near a max contract. So I think probably what happens is you're going to see, this is generally how it goes, first couple waves of free agency happen. Some teams left sitting around with a bunch of cap space. In years past, if we go back to the beginning part of the show, that team might have said, we'll roll into the season with that cap space. Can't do that anymore. What happens is, let's say you're still sitting 30 million under the salary floor. What happens is they put an artificial cap hold on day one of the regular season up to bring you up to the floor. So you can't just sit on it. So basically it is, you might as well spend it because there's nothing else you can do with it. That's where I think, you might have a team or two that says, man, we got 15 million in cap space left over. We can't just sit on this money. All right, let's we'll throw it to Tobias Harris. I think the big thing is you're going to see him probably get a very short-term deal, either a 1 or 2 year deal. Might even be like what we call a 2-1, which is really a 2 year deal with a team option, or like a non-guaranteed on the second year, so the team can control things. And that's probably going to be in that 15 to 20 million range, would be my guess. Because teams will still look at him and be like, all right, he can still score some. He's an okay rebounder. He can still shoot. Like, yeah, we're good to bring him in. And my thing with Tobias Harris, going all the way back to his Magic days, was, yeah, Tobias Harris can average 20 points per game, but he does it like 25 points tonight, 5 points the next, 30 points, 10 points. Like he's very, very inconsistent. Now he's never really shaken that label.
I think that it sounds like the Pistons are going to be going after Tobias Harris, and a lot of Pistons fans have been freaking out about paying him $25+ million. So I'm sure they'll be happy to hear about what you just said there.
Let me say one quick thing on that.
Go ahead.
If they pay him $25 million and it's a 1 year deal, whatever. It doesn't really matter because it's a 1 year deal. And I don't think it would be, well, oh, geez, we could have traded for Anthony Edwards, but we signed Tobias Harris instead. That's not going to be a thing, right? That's not going to be a real thing that happens. So I don't think they're going to pay him that at the expense of getting somebody else. If they do, I'll happily come back on here and trash them up and down and sideways, because that's not a smart decision.
Right. Okay. So the last thing I'll ask you here is, and the reason why we only got 2 questions, because a lot of the questions that they sent in, you've already answered. So thank you for that. But the only other one that I don't think we've really touched on yet that they want to hear from you is, given the Pistons situation, given the this offseason's free agents, and given the new CBA or the current CBA, like you said, what do you believe is the ideal length of contracts the Detroit Pistons should be handing out this offseason?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'm not going to probably answer it to the person who asked its full satisfaction, because I think it's very dependent on the player that they're signing. If it's Tobias Harris, 1 or 2 years, ideally the second year is on team control. If it's a younger player, if it's, I'm just going to pull up my free agent list here real quick. If it was like a OG Anunoby, let's just say, for whatever reason he's not going back to the Knicks, you're going to give him a 4-year contract and you're fine. Like that's perfectly fine. It really is dependent on, is this guy just get us out of being the worst team in the league signing and help us improve, help our young guys play meaningful basketball later into the season over the next couple of years, 1 or 2 year deals, no problem. If it is this guy, we can't believe we can get him, and he is now a kind of, we're maybe he's a little bit older, but we're calling him part of our core moving forward, 4-year deal is perfectly fine with that. So it's very, very player dependent. There is no, I think people are getting excited because they're hearing billions of dollars in the new TV deal. And the last time we heard that, we had Timofey Mozgov and Luol Deng get paid ridiculous contracts on night 1 of free agency. We are not going to see a cap spike like that. In the CBA, what they agreed to was cap smoothing. So what that means is, rather than 1 year the cap jumps $40 million and everybody has cap space, and then exactly one class of free agents benefits from it. Because if we had that, Tobias Harris would have got $35-40 million probably, because you got to spend it somewhere and the cap went way up. What we're going to see is, in this case, you're going to see a spot where it is the cap is only going to go up a max of 10%. And that's not even this offseason. We're talking the next offseason and the next offseason beyond that. This offseason, it's going to be a lot. It'll be maybe cap out at 5%, probably not even that high. But when that TV deal kicks in, which would be for the summer of 2025 offseason, where it's only going to go up 10%. Now, 10% is still a lot. You're still talking a pretty good sized jump, but it's not going to be this massive $40 million spike that's going to cause all this stuff. Because of that, I don't think you're going to see players like angling for, like, I got to time it up, so I'm a free agent then, so I only want a 1-year deal this summer or anything like that. I think it'll be much more of a normal type environment as far as length of contracts go.
All right, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, Keith, for coming on. I do want to say that final point that Keith made goes along with what I've been saying on the podcast for a minute. The Pistons can make numerous different versions of their team over the next 6 years. If they want someone, they want to bring in some players that can help them get to playing, help them get to respectability, they can do so without screwing over their long-term flexibility. And that's a big worry amongst a lot of Pistons fans is, if you go out and get these guys, you've capped yourself for the next 7 years. That's not the case. It doesn't have to be the case. Just do 2-year contracts, have team options on the back end. You can get out of it and then make a new team once you get to that level. But you have to get out of worst team in the NBA territory. You have to, whatever you can. Just don't do it by giving long-term contracts. But anyways, thank you, Keith, for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. We'll see you probably next summer, unless something crazy happens this offseason in the free agency that we need to hear why the hell this happened. I might hit you up, but probably see you again next offseason. Appreciate you always coming on. You can follow him over on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there. Catch you later. Peace out.